Hi guys, and welcome back to the Early Bird Photo News. Last week I shared a rumor that I heard from my own sources that there will be another full-frame mirrorless camera from Canon this year. I know a lot of you were a little bit skeptical because I said it might actually be an R6 replacement and you thought there should be an EOS R replacement first. But this week, long after me, Canon Rumors has also brought out a similar rumor that they heard from their own sources that there won't be an EOS R replacement this year, but that there will definitely be another Canon mirrorless camera this year that will sit somewhere around or slightly below where the R6 currently sits. From what I've heard from my sources, which at this state I don't have any reason to doubt, it will be a camera with less than 30 megapixels and fantastic video features. It might be an R6 II or it might be a camera with a different name, but it won't be an EOS R Mark II. If you ask me personally, I don't think it makes sense to replace the EOS R at all. There's definitely a case to have an EOS RP version 2, a cheap entry-level full-frame mirrorless camera, but the EOS R, to upgrade it, where would it sit in the Canon lineup? I don't really see it. Currently with 30 megapixels and quite sort of low-end features, no eye tracking, it kind of makes sense. It's like a cheaper alternative, but it's very limited in terms of what it can do. But if you upgraded that camera to the standard of like an R5, so great eye tracking, great sensor in the sort of 30 megapixel range or even 35 megapixel range, this camera would basically completely eliminate all R6 sales and it would sit very closely to an R5. And also the naming. It doesn't really fit in the naming convention at all if we have soon an EOS R1, R3, R5, R6, R7, R10. Having an R Mark II also doesn't really follow in that line or it flows very well. So I'd be surprised if there was an EOS R update. We might see an update to that camera with a different name, but I could also be wrong. What do you guys think? Will there be an EOS R Mark II, or is that something that Canon will just scrap and release cameras that fit more in line with the current naming system of all the other EOS R cameras? I also find it interesting that Canon is releasing so many kind of lower end mirrorless cameras all in a row. We now have the R6, RP, R10, R7, all kind of in that lower end of the market, and it's almost getting crowded with some of the features of the cameras kind of overlapping. And the one camera we haven't seen at all that's a clear kind of big hole missing in the lineup is the R1, and we haven't heard or seen anything about the camera. It's unlikely that we're actually still going to see it this year, so we'll have to wait into sometime next year to even have that camera, whereas Nikon and Sony have clear great competitors in the field that currently, at least in some degrees, outshine what Canon has. So obviously Canon is selling much more numbers of the lower end cameras, but I would have thought that at least in the past, they also prided themselves of having some of the best, if not the best kind of 1 series cameras. And at the moment that seems to be quite neglected, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see what kind of cameras will come out in the next month and years. Just as last week, this week I've mainly been editing new photos and videos, just like this beautiful photo right there behind me of 2 Youngula honeyeaters, a bird I was very keen on getting on my road trip. It might not be the most sort of spectacular looking bird, but it's a quite kind of rare bird because it only lives in a tiny area. If you look it up in the field guide, it's almost impossible to see its range because it's just a tiny dot on the map. After struggles initially, I was finally able to get some photos I was very happy with. I don't know how it is for you guys, but for me, there's always some photos I'm really excited about when it comes to editing. And then you have a lot of other photos from a trip that you know that you should be editing, but you're just not as excited about them. But you know, eventually you will benefit a lot from editing them. So you kind of tough it out and work through another 50, 60, 70 images that you will edit and then send to stock agencies or put on your website or post online. So for me, especially when it comes to editing large quantities of images, a great helper has been my ProSets, because most RAW files I can just get to a perfect starting point with just one click. So that saves me a lot of time of moving sliders and changing colors, because I can just find something in the drop down or favorites menu, and that will usually get my RAW files to a fantastic starting point. And from there, I just have to run my workflow that I teach in my masterclass, and I get my images to stand out and look great in just a few minutes. And if you guys want to learn all about image editing and my pro sets to make your own images stand out and save a lot of time, make sure to check out my masterclass and the pro sets in the description. Let's talk about a quite strange Canon phenomenon or flaw that I've experienced and a few of my friends have experienced as well. And when you see it for the first time, it's actually quite odd. Let's say you're using two cards in your camera, card 1 for photos and card 2 for videos, for instance. Now, in some cases, it can happen that if you put your card in the computer, you suddenly have like 20 or 30 folders. In every folder, there's a few files starting with like 001, 002, etc. So for some reason, the camera has created continuous new folders and always started the file sequencing with 0001 again. So while this is not the most dramatic issue in the world, it's still definitely annoying when you want to download the files because there's actually a lot of duplicate file names on the folder with the same date. I'm not entirely sure what causes this issue, but I suspect it has to do with the file numbering. Because if the file numbers on card 2 are very high, like in the high 9980 90s, I suspect that the camera will always reset when you switch from card 1 to card 2. So whenever you switch to card 2 to record a video, for instance, the camera will continue with the file numbering from that card. So if it's very high, like 9980, you take one video, the file will be called 9981. You switch back to card number 1, the next file will be file 9982, and then you take 20 more photos, and the camera will create a new folder starting with 0001 again. So far so good, but it seems that now if you switch back to card 2 again, the camera resets and the file numbering starts again at 9982 or 83 this time. So now if you take another couple of videos, you're at like 9985 for instance, you switch back to card 1, take some photos, the camera will create another folder starting at 0001 again. And now it seems that until card 2 actually ticks over into a new sequencing section as well, or you take card 2 out, the camera will basically always create a new folder every time you switch back to card 1 and take a few photos because it just resets the numbering. I'm actually not entirely sure if that's a true cause of the issue, but that's the only explanation I have because that's when it seems to happen. If you shoot photos on one card, video on the other card, and you have very high file numberings on the second card. It's definitely not a huge issue, but very confusing when it happens to you the first time. Has that ever happened to you guys before? Is it just me and my two friends because we shoot so much photos and videos onto different cards at times? Another thing I noticed with large memory cards on my trip, in this case CF Express Type B cards that were 1 terabyte or larger, that whenever I had a lot of photos on them, for instance over 15,000 photos on the one card, it would slow down my R5 significantly when I was turning it on. So normally it turns on kind of instantly, but having a card in it with over 15,000 photos on it, it would take sometimes 3-4 seconds before the camera actually turned on. At first I thought something was wrong, but then I remembered maybe it's all the photos on the camera, so I took out the card, put a fresh card in, and it was fine. But that definitely reminded me that maybe having those huge cards isn't the best option at the moment, because I never had any problems with the 512 gigabyte cards. When they are full, it's still fine. But the 1 terabyte card with over 15,000 C-RAW files definitely seemed to cause the camera some issue where it just seemed to kind of have to scan through all the files before being ready for photos again. And that was just annoying. So I had to not use the 1 terabyte cards to their full capacity. Canon is still working on some fantastic faster RF lenses like 135mm, 24, 35mm lenses, but it seems like these have been delayed again. They've already been delayed a little bit this year, and now it seems like we're not going to see them before next year. So while it's exciting to see these lenses coming out because they'll be fantastic, for instance, for astrophotography, people photography, street photography, we still have to wait a little bit longer, and I would also like to pick up some of these lenses for just video shooting. But with all the production issues, it seems that Canon, at least at the moment, is focusing more on new cameras than bringing out a lot of new lenses. Not many Nikon news this week, but the Z9 is definitely winning all the awards for best camera of the year from different magazines and different organizations, and also the Nikon lenses like the 800 6.3 or 400 2.8 with the built-in 1.4 extender are getting a lot of praise. And I totally agree. When you look at just what has been coming out last year, Nikon has certainly done a fantastic push with great lenses and the great Z9 camera, especially after that latest firmware update. And in almost a shocking turn of events, we have some Sony news. There's been an interesting leak about a new Tamron 80 to 400mm lens. And if it's anything like the Tamron 150 to 500mm lens that I was able to use last year on the Sony A1 and A9, I suspect it to be a fantastic lens. Image quality was great. The only downside with the Tamron lens that I tried was that the image stabilization seemed to be quite jerky and jumpy at times. So maybe Tamron was able to improve that a little bit more, and then this 80 to 400 could be a fantastic solution for a lot of Sony users because it will likely come in a lot cheaper than the current Sony 100 to 400mm lens. And lastly, just two more things. If you love birds and bird photography and bird books, you should definitely check out my mate Glenn's hummingbird book that just came out with fantastic photos and fantastic information about hummingbirds. And if you always wondered what the 100 to 500 is like in really dark conditions, in dark mangroves, and whether you can get great images with the lens, I would recommend that you check out my video that I posted last week where I take you into the mangroves, into the field, onto some cool boardwalks where I'm gonna try to photograph some awesome flycatchers. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed this week's early bird photo news. Please give me a thumbs up for the video. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys very soon. Bye guys.